Welcome everyone to today's LookyLOO Q&A webinar. We're happy to have you here and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Whether you're a prospective investor or whether you've invested in LookyLOO in the past, we hope to provide some valuable information today. And again, we're glad you're here. My name is Tom Talbert. I am on the LookyLOO team and I'm also an investor in LookyLOO, and I'll guide today's discussion with LookyLOO CEO Ed Dilworth. And good morning, Ed. Good afternoon to everyone as well. Ed is a three-time founder with 2 exits. He's a remarkable leader who has led communication development efforts for brands like Chevrolet, Mini, Electronic Arts, and the U.S. Navy, among other brands. And today's focus, and his focus and the focus of LookyLOO right now, is on the $222 billion relocation real estate market. As you may know, we're in the midst of a revolution in terms of relocation. More people are moving today, and more people have the opportunity to move than ever before, primarily because of their ability to work from home. And the dynamics and complexities of moving have never been greater, and that's really the purpose of LookyLOO. LookyLOO is right in the center of this complexity, and we're helping to help people find the next great place to call home. During today's discussion, we'll focus on 5 major areas. We'll talk about the state of the extremely dynamic housing and real estate market. We'll talk about what's changed since the last time LookyLOO had a round of funding last year. We'll talk about the approach LookyLOO has taken as a result of the changes in the real estate and relocation market. We'll discuss the plan for moving forward, and we'll also touch on what LookyLOO will do with the funds raised and what's the exit for investors. Also, a couple of housekeeping items. You should know that today's webinar is being recorded. That's number 1. And number 2, please ask questions. You'll be able to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to those questions toward the end of our formal program today. So again, welcome to everyone. And again, welcome to you, Ed. Let's get at it. Here's the first question. There's been a lot of turmoil in the housing and real estate market since the last time we spoke. Can you give us a sense of what you think is important that has changed and how it impacts LookyLOO and what LookyLOO is doing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Tom, and thank you everyone who's on the call. I think there have been two kind of macro events that have happened, or 2 macro trends that have happened since last year that are important. And the first is, as Tom knows, and some of the people on the call know, we started talking to the state of Michigan a couple of months ago about a campaign to attract people to Michigan in general, and in particular attract people to Michigan in some of the emerging EV market jobs, battery system jobs that Michigan, of course, wants to control in the next generation of the automotive industry. And I guess in the background, I knew, because I see ads on Twitter or somewhere, that Indiana wants you to move there, or Ohio wants you to set up your business in Ohio, and you see those generally. But I frankly hadn't thought about them as it relates to what we're doing and what we learned both from the state of Michigan and then in follow-up calls with the city of Worcester and the city of Myrtle Beach and the city of Modesto and the central Massachusetts region and the Central Valley of California, is that there's a war going on for talent, for people. And sometimes it's general. Sometimes, like the state of Michigan, they simply want people to move there, whether it's in a particular job or not. And sometimes it's really specific, like Charleston, South Carolina wants nurses and doctors and PTs to move there because they've drawn a lot of retirees and now need healthcare professionals to go there. And what's changed, I think, most dramatically is cities like Worcester and Detroit and Modesto are now in the hunt for those people when they may not have been in prior generations, because now if you work in Boston, or if your job is in Boston, but you only go in 1 day a week, then Worcester's a realistic place to commute from. And if you live in Sacramento, but you work in San Francisco, it's hard, but it's realistic to live there and commute back into San Francisco 1 day a week or a couple times a month. And so you have this rewiring of the company to account for the rise of these mid-size or smaller, or sometimes referred to in the real estate market as second-tier cities, as people want to buy homes and want to live in a different lifestyle experience. And And that has opened up an entirely new market for our business, which is the pursuit at an earlier stage than, let's say, the realtor market or the HR department market, for states and regions and cities that are legitimately in the hunt for people to move to them, start businesses, work in existing businesses. And that rewiring, which has been going on now, at least as long as COVID, and perhaps for longer with empty nesters and retirees, has changed everything for the country and changed everything, perhaps even for the world. And we're at the forefront of taking advantage of that through offering people counsel on where might be a good place to live. So that's number one, I think. And if that answers in part your question, the other macro issue is the National Association of Realtor ruling and settlement that is kind of blowing up to some degree the buyer side of the realtor market. For anybody who doesn't know, there was a recent ruling and settlement that said that realtors on the buyer's side can no longer automatically receive 3% as their commission. That has to be negotiated. That has to be agreed on with the buyer. And to even start the process of looking at homes, you have to sign a contract with an agreement for someone that you may have just met online. And what we've learned from realtors and from consumers and from the market in general as a result of this is that buyers agents who historically would help consumers in these early stages because of the 3% pot of gold at the end of the education journey, it no longer can do that to a large degree. There's not enough money at the end of a 1% or a flat rate or 1.5% or whatever the number is they negotiate agreement to educate someone on the entire Bay Area or the entire South Central to Boston Central Massachusetts to Boston area. And what that means is that the consumer is going to shift from leaning on buyer's agents for that kind of education to tools and platforms that do it for them. And our realtor partners and our customers recognize that that's a position that LookyLOO plays, that we can support their education in the early stage so that by the time they get to a realtor, they're educated and they know, at least in a shortlist way, what would be a good city or neighborhood for them to consider. And so the buyer's agent doesn't carry that burden. So I think, we believe, while it's obviously, difficult for buyer's agents to work through the nuances of that, we're going to be a good resource both for consumers as well as those realtors in getting consumers educated for the least amount of cost in time. And the most frictionless way so that the buyer's agents can focus on the last mile. So those are the two big things that have happened, I think, on a macro level since the last time we spoke.
Well, and this whole sector of destination management organizations who are looking to accomplish two things: one, to get people to move to their states or to their cities or to their regions. As you mentioned, with like the state of Michigan or any other state who is looking to bring both businesses and people for jobs, that's a real thing, and they have resources and they have funding to support a platform like LookyLOO, which is great. The second question: how have the products and services for LookyLOO expanded and changed since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, so there's a few areas. One is just total cities covered, expanded. We've nearly doubled the number of cities that we cover. We've expanded the number of neighborhoods covered for each city by at least 2 or 3-fold. So we've increased cities several hundred. We've increased total number of neighborhoods by several thousand as a byproduct of, a dozen or whatever the number is per city. So just sheer expansion, which has a big impact on SEO, has a big impact on the ease with which we bring in larger populations of consumers and the number of cities and neighborhoods that we can attract realtors to the platform because we're covering them now. So that's been it's kind of our core expansion job, is to increase our reach. The content that we include in each of those cities and neighborhoods has also expanded. I think the number one area is school coverage. We heard loud and clear from families, whether that was civilians or through the armed services, which is an area that we've moved into a bit, that we need heavier school coverage. That is, I think, Tom, we were talking to the Admiral about this topic, and he said, well, the top three reasons we move to a particular cities are schools, schools, and schools. And so, school expansion was critical. But also just expanding the number of data sources or the data topics that we're including. We've expanded by about 20 to 25 with a new API feed to data. Everything from a lot more economic information has been integrated into the system. So that's been helpful for those left-brained people that use the data as the kind of one of the major factors in their consideration. And then I think probably the biggest long-term impact is the expansion of what our Movebook tool can do for someone. So for anyone who doesn't know, the way the system works is you can go and you can learn about cities and neighborhoods, and then to save them and then to have an account, you set up a Movebook. And a Movebook is a tool that supports someone throughout their move journey. It supports them in the early days as having a workspace where they save everything, whether those are cities or neighborhoods or their school listings or their school scores on niche.com. or their listings or their job opportunities. All of those things can be saved in your Movebook. And expanding the characteristics that Movebook provides is, to use a classic expression, creates more stickiness for the platform. And that's an area, not to jump ahead to another question, where we really see a lot of development work coming. Guiding people through what is a really complicated process on the consumer side is really important, but also on a revenue generation side, at each significant decision-making step in that process is an opportunity for us to do lead gen, whether that's mortgage insurance, moving company, furniture company, realtor, of course, any of those characteristics, there's a lead gen opportunity for us. And so I would say those are probably the biggest areas in which we've had expansion, either on the content or on the product side.
Yeah, no, Movebook is key, and also just the ability for people to share that content or all of the content that they put into their Movebook with other people, because we know oftentimes there are lots of decision makers that go into moving, so that information being easily shared is critical. What's coming up next for products and services and marketing for LookyLOO?
Yeah, so on the content side, which is also a characteristic of the product, the expansion into thinking of cities and states and regions as customers of ours, not just something that we write about, but as economic opportunities for LookyLOO, and combined with consumers saying that they want this information, we're expanding the content we cover to include a lot more city amenities. Some of it seems very obvious, but we've heard from empty nest and retirees, they want deeper information on healthcare. If you're a young professional or a professional, local transportation is critical. If you're an entrepreneur, it's critical that you understand the co-working and venture space. It's critical that you understand the quality of the internet signals. There's a whole bunch of kind of the guts of a city that are really important. We've heard a lot also in that city, those city characteristics, the desire to understand economic development plans for those cities. Because when we go to a new city, take Modesto as an example, let's say you're moving from LA to Modesto, you're making an investment and you're making a leap that Modesto is going to increase in value. And some people think about that, and some people think simply about, are the schools good for my kids? And some people think, well, I'm going to put $600,000 or $700,000 into a home. What's the future for this city? What's the likelihood that it's going to become the next Paso Robles or whatever is a city that's an icon for a rising tide? And so understanding that cities are, increasing local transportation, light rail, heavier rail, it's important to Modesto and Fresno and Stockton that they're going to be the first cities on the fast train line that's hopefully going to get built, at least in the, across the Central Valley first. And it's also important to them that they know that the characteristic and walkability of the downtown areas are also improving. I mean, those are probably two of the major factors we see in people considering cities is Yeah, I'm willing to leave a big city like LA or San Francisco, but I really want to know that this city that I'm considering is going to have, well, maybe not all that the bigger city has to offer. It's going to have, decent arts and culture, decent outdoor lifestyle, decent walkability, and then I'll like living here. And what's wonderful about that is that all these cities that I was referring to earlier, like a Worcester or a Modesto or a Fresno or Stockton, are all heavily investing money in developing actually, directly relevant services. And so building out that content, both so that our customers, the cities and the regions and the states, are happy that we're communicating all the things that are wonderful about those places, but also that the consumers know what's coming down the road, so that I know that this is going to be a good place to live. The final characteristic that we're adding in that particular area is giving the cities an opportunity to say something about themselves. Tom, you and I have spoken to the mayors of several cities about what they would like to say about their city. Right now, LookyLOO offers our narrative about a city. It offers locals' point of view through our reviews. And now we're going to give the city a chance to say something about itself, whether the economic development is something they think is important for you to understand, whether they think the way in which you experience the city through arts or outdoor experiences or whatever it may be is the selling point. They're going to have an opportunity to have their say. And that's important both for the consumer to hear it, but it's also important for us, for our customers, to have a chance to have their say. So those are, that's a big deal for what is a really kind of growing characteristic of our business development effort, which is really expanding the degree to which cities, regions, states are actively represented. And then the other big area, which we talked about a bit, is Movebook. And pathing people. This is something that we hear a lot about, which is that people are interested in guidance through what is a complicated process. And, to date, we've been largely an open space where you can work. And that's great for some people, but some people want to be walked through the process. And so our Movebook tool is having a series of, you could call them quiz structures or guided experiences in which you are taken through each step and given counsel on each of those steps, in addition to access to professionals who would serve you. And, again, we think that guided experience, that helpful tool through what is a really painful process, the early stage of consideration, the, steps in which you evaluate which cities, meet your needs, and then ultimately, the process of the move. We provide either an open workspace or a guided experience, or we'll offer a guided experience through that, so that you feel, well managed. And in other tools we've built in the past, whether that is for the College Board or even some of the things that we did together on the U.S. Navy, Tom, we kind of know that some people want that guided support as they make decisions, because they may not have made a decision this big before. So those, I would say, are the big kind of areas in which we're doing expansion.
Yeah, and removing the complexity is so important, and that's really where LookyLOO can play a key role, clearly, in simplifying the process of relocating and maybe bring some joy to the process along the way. Certainly, a lot of information and content along the way. I see a few people have put questions in the chat. Thank you for doing that. Anybody who has additional questions, please, just as a reminder, if you have a question, you can put it into the chat, and we'll answer those questions in just a second. Another question for you, Ed. What will LookyLOO do with the funds being raised now?
Yeah, so the two primary areas are product development. Really, it's integrating greater degrees of technology into the system to make it smarter for the person. We've always believed in the marriage between technology and human. The technology is the underlying, feeds and the underlying intelligence of things like sentiment analysis, which is, LLM or AI centric. But increasingly, whether it's within the Movebook or it's on the site in general, making the system smart to understand what would be like what you're looking at. If you've been in any kind of sophisticated platform like an Airbnb, it's constantly working behind the scenes to not only serve you up what you're specifically looking for, but what might be a like experience. And so adding that kind of artificial intelligence, that kind of decision-making system that operates behind the scenes to supplement content, to, always give you options. If you're looking at Worcester and you decide that you want something a little more suburban, then the tool is offering counsel about Auburn or Sturbridge or whatever would be a neighboring city that may be just as, just as strong. We are going to continue to test AI for content generation. So far, it has worked well for large cities and been unsuccessful for smaller cities. But, there are brilliant minds working constantly in Hayes Valley and San Francisco trying to make these AI systems better. And so we're going to keep evaluating those, and we'll be investing in the integration of AI into the system on an ongoing basis. And then it's business development and marketing. We are investing heavily in the business development against the state, cities, and regional pursuit of that as a category, as well as marketing for traffic against the cities and regions where we have sponsors, whether those are realtor sponsors or ultimately other professional service sponsors, and so you can imagine a lot more traffic through the dollars that we receive and a lot more technological improvement of the system.
Excellent. And finally, has anything changed about expectations for exit for investors?
Well, my expectation, it continues to be that companies in the real estate platform space are likely the most logical exit plan. I believe that those platforms, and we've done work with many of them, will need to expand their at least the degree to which they land prospects via SEO, and that state, city, regional coverage will be a great path into it. And we know that from direct conversations, and that those would be logical places by which we would potentially have relationships. But we also know the school platforms are interested in broader content, and the service platforms that target the DMO market. For anybody who doesn't know, destination management organizations that work, or economic development organizations, there are platforms that serve those communities. Those would also be possible relationships. I think the plan would be a strategic partnership first, for data expansion, for traffic generation, and we're working on those with some light things like affiliate marketing relationships and partnership. But I would imagine the path would be similar, and that one of these large organizations would be a partner for us. To use a colloquialism, we would date for a bit and see what it felt like, and then maybe a stronger relationship. That's the discussions that we've had to date have been centered around that kind of relationship. But we need more time to run before we would do something like that. But that would be the common path.
Yep. Excellent. We have several questions that have been asked. We're going to get to those, and then I have a couple of final questions for you, Ed. Here's a question for us. What resources do you offer to help them understand market trends, financing options, and other critical aspects of buying a home? Thinking the reference to the user.
So, it's a great question, and one which we're going to be starting to deliver via the blog. So for anybody who knows the company, we are, started as a research company, and our underlying tool is a research platform. And, our first instinct was to supply this research via our professional partners to realtors, HR professionals, the essentially B2B customers we have. But we've heard in both surveys and, one-on-one interviews with customers that they are also interested in it, in part due to that question that we talked about earlier, or that point that was made earlier about their interest in making smart bets on their real estate choices. I think for people who lived through 2007, 2008, as homeowners, a lot of people got trapped and couldn't sell and couldn't move. And I think, with high interest rates, there's some concern that they could be put in that position again. And so information on cities that are making progress, the intelligence of the masses based on what is everyone else doing on LookyLOO? Where are they looking? What characteristics matter most to them? Ultimately, I think when you're doing something as considered as this, you don't want to make a mistake. You want as much information as you can about how other people are making decisions. And so we are going to aggressively supply that data to our customers, to consumers, essentially through the site. It's possible that there will be a professional subscription model for getting access to that. That's something we're looking at as well. But I don't know if that answers the question, but I think LookyLOO has an enormous amount of data that's building as a byproduct of watching consumer behavior. And as an example, the explosion in the second tier city that forms the cities that form rings around the what was historically the sun, whether that's a New York or an LA or Chicago or a Boston. If you studied the traffic patterns, which we do, everything's changed. And what used to be, you lived in Framingham and you drove 30 minutes into Boston, you're now just as likely to live in Worcester and only go in one day a week and spend the rest of the time in a tight circle around Worcester. And just an infographic of that traffic shift tells a powerful story about the rewiring of the country that we think people would want to know. And if they hadn't thought about Worcester or Nashua or Providence or Burlington or Portland or whatever else might be, not have been on their radar way back in the Wayback Machine 5 years ago when they had to go into work 5 days a week, are all, probably eligible because they're, 90 minutes or less drives from, Burlington isn't, but the rest are, 90-minute drives to Boston. So yeah, we think that information is important and we're going to provide it.
Excellent. One more question here. Could you elaborate on how your educational resources have evolved to meet changing consumer needs and technological advancements?
I think what you're asking is about how we're providing information on schools.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing we did is we just created.
I think it could be, broader than that also. Could elaborate on your educational resources. So those resources educating the user or the visitor. And certainly that includes schools, but I think it's broader than that as well.
Yeah. So our intent is to take the behaviors of the fully anonymized, but study the behaviors of people on LookyLOO and turn that inside out so that the people at the site who are interested in understanding the interests, choices, behaviors of the entire population using the platform would be available to you. So if you understood the characteristics that people are ranking the highest, if you understood the trending of people in terms of moves, if you understood the characteristics that mattered to them from anything from the type of place they're buying versus renting. We're surveying our customers all the time. Types of mortgages. Are they doing, variable mortgages and then hoping that rates go down later? Any characteristic that from the first search to the move, we would provide that data. And we are, our intention is to increase quite a bit the degree to which we get customer interaction during that process, largely through the move book. Sometimes those would be things like reviews. I don't know that we would do reviews of realtors, but certainly reviews of moving companies. The nature of the decisions that they're making during the process, again, fully anonymized, but by showing that to all customers, everybody understands what everybody else is doing, and so you don't feel as though you're, making decisions in the dark. I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, I think so. And your reference to MoveBook is important because that tool was not one of the initial was not initially a component of LookyLOO. So, as time went on, you were able to adapt and evolve, and that's certainly a way that LookyLOO has evolved to meet changing consumer needs. That's certainly one example. And you also mentioned the stickiness of MoveBook being integral in terms of LookyLOO's behavior and the desired behavior that we'd like to see in the consumer coming back.
Yeah, and I think we kept a close eye on Houzz, which we've referenced on previous calls, and the way in which you can go there and use it like Pinterest. You can go there and you can pin designs and you can say, I like that kitchen, and never return. And certainly, they probably make a little money off you through advertising revenue. But the way that platform evolved was to become a workspace for consumers as they go through interior design and architecture projects. And their platform for managing it is a real model, I think, for us in thinking about something as complicated as a move, and reducing the stress by having a good guided system with checklists and tasks that you make sure that you at least have the opportunity to understand would be a good way to process, was a really critical part in both thinking about what our customers need and ultimately what we need in order to generate revenue, because the MoveBook will be a big component in our revenue generation because of all the stops in there that lead to lead gen and other sponsorship opportunities. So,
yep. Another question: how might the upcoming election influence the real estate markets you focused on?
Well, the real estate industry, I don't know if realtors can take another hit. And frankly, I don't feel like, either Biden or Trump, they're not supposed to have a dramatic influence on monetary policy. They're not supposed to be able to move interest rates. That's supposed to be an independent responsibility. But I do believe that Biden's IRA has had a huge influence on things like job growth around manufacturing. We've seen it in across the country, where manufacturing, which historically would have gone overseas, is now staying in the U.S. And of course, there's 2,000 to 10,000 new jobs every time one of these plants is opened or reopened. So generally speaking, I think that kind of economic policy driving manufacturing in the U.S. is a good thing for the country. Same for transportation growth. Any kind of development of transportation, train lines, et cetera, is amazing for real estate opportunities, because inevitably new housing is built along transportation lines, giving people a new opportunity to live in a convenient place for local or broader communication. So I haven't heard Trump say anything about these kinds of policies. So I have no opinion on his opinion on it, but certainly what the Biden administration has done in the last couple of years has been a good thing for the market. Obviously interest rates are the thing that most holds back the real estate market right now. And the ability of trying to control inflation at the same time, hoping that interest rate goes down is above my pay grade. But you can imagine that if interest rates move down to 5% over the next couple of years, the explosion in moves is going to be like something we've never seen.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly the Inflation Reduction Act has played a big role in terms of infrastructure that you mentioned, Ed, but even discussion about climate change and how that's affecting where people want to choose to live and
well, that's another factor we've added based on consumer demand. A lot of people moved to the Southeast, particularly along the coast during the early stages of COVID. And if you move to Wilmington, North Carolina, all of a sudden you realize, Wilmington, North Carolina is wonderful. But if you bought a home on stilts in Wilmington, North Carolina, or the Outer Banks, or any of these areas, you're really interested in understanding how climate mitigation is going to affect your real estate choice, which speaks to the opportunities for states like Michigan and Indiana and Ohio, which are certainly more secure in terms of that kind of shift.
Haven't been a lot of hurricanes there recently.
Yep.
Just a couple more questions, Ed, that may be beneficial for a prospective investor. How do you consider, what do you think about, or how do you think about LookyLoo's competition? What does the competitive set look like?
So, we've talked in the past about the fact that the big listing sites, Zillow, Redfin, Homes.com is probably the most aggressive one in the market now. We battle with them for SEO. They're beasts in the world of SEO, either either SEO or SEM. And so our biggest competition for traffic is certainly, those platforms. Now, they serve the last mile. They serve the listing. And so sometimes, like a Trulia will expand its neighborhood content, or a Homes.com will expand its neighborhood content, but they think in terms of the home as the ultimate object. And we don't. We think of the city as the object, or the region. That's where that's the mindset. Our people are shopping for cities, and the rest of the great majority of the population of competitors thinks of people shopping for a home. Now, it makes perfect sense why that's important to them, because there's a lot of money at stake in the home. We just want to serve people earlier in the process. So those are our competitors, but they think about the market differently than we do. So we're scared of them in terms of their resources for driving organic traffic, but we're also developing content that is earlier stage, and that they are not, that's too far upstream for them. And so we're somewhat alone in that upstream content. But that does not mean we don't have competitors. It just means that we're in a slightly different space than they are.
I think you could argue that it's a little more consumer centric in terms of, as you mentioned earlier in the journey, and we're really not trying to sell anyone, or LookyLoo's not trying to sell anything to anyone.
Well, and we're happy to hand them off when they're ready to realtors through our site. We have realtors available for them that they can be referred to. And if there's one thing we've learned, particularly now with the contract required, that they're not ready, that they need some time to breathe. They need some time to think. And it's actually in the interest of the realtor that they spend time, breathing and getting educated, so that the process is more efficient for the realtor. So,
hopefully, a really, really valuable lead. You touched on this earlier, but a question came in. How does the recent ruling with the lawsuit with the NAR, National Association of Realtors, change the landscape and opportunity with platforms like LookyLOO?
Well, I hate to say it's a good thing, because we feel for our realtor, brethrens and sisters, because it's been complicated for them and they're struggling, but it actually is a huge opportunity for platforms like ours. Because, as I said, realtors, many didn't want to do that early education anyway. Many of our partner sponsors, whether they enjoy doing it, they certainly embrace it, but with a lower commission on the back end of that, it's the efficacy of doing that kind of early work dies. And so that opens up a platform that does that education for them, to a lot of growth. And it makes sense when we think of it. Markets despise the middle. They despise the inefficiencies, the middle, and what succeeds in markets, and we've seen this in market after market after market, are boutique offerings, full custom serve, full couture experiences, which is what you would get from a realtor, once they have kind of passed a certain, to sign a contract, and then frictionless. And those two kind of models work, high end and frictionless. And we want to serve the frictionless side of the market. And we're really the first to target that person who is not ready to talk to a person. I mean, I don't know if anybody else felt this way, but when I would get on a restaurant site to order food during COVID and it made you call, I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And I feel the same way about people who are going through our experience when they feel like they're faced with talking to a realtor. They're just not ready. They want to use a frictionless platform to get educated, to take themselves down a step, and then when they're ready, they will. And I think that recent ruling is going to really separate the two worlds. There's going to be people spending an enormous amount of time on a platform like LookyLOO getting educated before they get to a realtor, where historically that would be very blended. They might do a little bit of education and then they would spend a lot of time with the realtor just simply getting educated, driving around neighborhoods and doing things that now it's relatively simple to get educated about online. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah. Let me ask one final question. I think all the questions from our audience have been asked and answered. I have one more question that I think is relevant, and then any closing comments that you have, Ed, would be great. It's come up before. How does LookyLOO think about international markets or international expansion? Right now, the focus has been, or currently the focus is on the U.S. Is there a future in international?
Yeah, I think there is. We've been interviewing people and organizations and realtors in European markets first. And so you could imagine, we've seen the rise of the digital nomad. We see the rise of I don't know what the expression is, the 3-month mover, if that rings a bell with anyone, but it's very common for empty nesters and retirees in particular, as well as digital nomads, to want to go live somewhere for 3 months. I think the 3-month thing probably is a byproduct of visas. Or maybe it's just the amount of time people feel like it would be fun to go live in London or Paris or Barcelona or Bali or wherever. And I'm guessing that our pathing to that will start with serving that digital nomad, empty nester nomad, 3-month nomad first. Now, in doing so, if it starts with the cities that are the big destinations for that type of move, it's a relatively simple step to simply add them. And so we'll probably be, we will inevitably be testing that. We have a lot of work to do for expansion in the US market. We will expand certainly to that 3-month structure. Looking at the major cities, it tends to be more Western European focused or European focused. Japan is being really aggressive about landing digital nomads. They're really hustling to try to get US population to move to Japan. So I think in Asia Pac, that would be a first target. And we have some representation, out of Hong Kong into Asia Pac. China is a little bit different. It still works largely the way the US used to work. You would move to Shanghai for your job, you would move to Beijing for your job, and there's not a lot of fluidity in that in the move market there yet. But there is in Japan and there is in Western Europe, and so those would be the logical first places.
Any final thoughts for our audience today?
Yeah, I guess I would just reiterate, since the last time we spoke, it's really glaringly obvious how this rewiring of the country is happening, and the rise of a whole new set of cities that were very prominent in earlier cycles of the country, whether that's textiles on the East Coast or automotive in the Midwest or agricultural on the West Coast. And these cities are fighting for populations, and we're going to represent them in getting those populations. And as I said, they really have an opportunity to win now. People are moving to the Inland Empire. There was an article recently in the New York Times on the Inland Empire, the largest population in the country that no one knows about. And I think the opportunity for LookyLOO, it really, I mean, I already felt excited about it, but the growth in states and cities and regions as a customer base, offers really an exponential, growth path for the company, and we're really excited about it. And for those who are on the call who have already invested, thank you. And for anyone on the call who's interested in investing, thank you. And happy to take follow-up questions beyond the call. You can do so at WeFunder. There's a method for asking questions there, or happy to provide contact information. And for anybody who is interested in investing, it's at wefunder.com/LookyLOO. There's more information about the company there. And, just again, thank you for previous participation and being on this call. It's great to have you, and we look forward to your continued participation in the company.
For sure. And I noticed one more question came up, and this is interesting. You may or may not want to answer it. Where would you like to move, given all of your findings, based on everything that you've learned about cities? It's like, oh, yeah, there are a lot of places for sure. Yeah,
it's tricky. We've at times thought we were empty nesting, and then we weren't empty nesting, and then we thought we were empty nesting, and then we weren't. I don't know if anybody else out there goes through this, but we seem to have some, as my father would have said, some boomerangs going on, which is great. It's fun. But so, we had imagined doing a tour, which is what a lot of people do, creating a short list and then, a couple options. My wife is originally from DC. We have one of our boomerangs who's moving there next week, in fact. And so I think in terms of that 3-month cycle, that this would be our home base, and that, health, everything else permitted, we would test, different cities. And I think maybe like a lot of people, you want to know, if you have kids, you want to know where they're going to end up before you make some kind of permanent call. So if all the kids end up on the East Coast, I could see making that a thing. I don't know. We have one kid who went to the University of Chicago and was like, I don't think I want that winter again. So maybe the Midwest is tougher call. But I think the plan, which is again what we hear from a lot of people, is we have our home base. We test different cities from DC, New York, maybe Southern California, maybe overseas, but I think the Bay Area would be continue to be home for a bit.
Yeah, excellent. Again, thanks to everybody who joined today and taking the time to learn more about LookyLOO. We're appreciative of that. And with that, we will conclude our webinar. Thank you again. If you'd like to get any more information, as Ed said, you can do that via the WeFunder platform, and we can answer any additional questions you have.